that after so much pressure decides that there will be an inquiry into the abuse of children, what is it about a government that says we will conduct that inquiry but we will exclude from it the abuse of children in church-run institutions, when a large proportion of the children who have been abused were abused in the so-called care of religious institutions? And what is it about a government that seeks to justify that by talking only of its responsibility as the Crown, as if it bears no responsibility for the fact that it contracted those religious institutions to take look upon it. And the third story is about a young boy, 13 years old, in the Hutt Valley, who killed himself last year. At the start of his first year at college, he came out to his family and his friends as gay. I should imagine a brave thing for a 13-year-old to do. When news spread at the school, he was bullied, he was hounded, and his life was made unbearable. So unbearable that on a Saturday night he hanged himself in the family garage. What is it about colonisation? What is it about the culture from which colonisation takes its strength and its power? What is it about that culture which makes it so fearful of a person's sexuality, so nervous about the truth of what a young child might be, that it allows other children to feel it's all right to bully that child, to verbally insult him, to physically assault him. And I wanted to tell those stories not because I enjoy telling them, not because in the work you do and in your experience, because they are exceptional stories, and I'm sure that you have similar experiences to recount. But I wanted to tell them so that when we talk about suicide, we do not abstract colonisation. That if a young person who takes his or her own life is Māori, or one of our whanaunga from the Pacific, then it is not only wrong, but I think inherently unjust to isolate that child from the history which has shaped them, their whānau, and their people. That no matter how much research we do, no matter how much work we do to try and understand suicide, if we continue to abstract colonisation as something over there, then we will not actually even begin to find the proper means to support those who feel so desperate that they have to take their own lives. It is easy, I guess, to objectify suicide, to research it into a medical or psychological abstraction. But just as I've always said, you cannot isolate a young man sitting in a cell in Paikea, or a young Māori woman sitting in a prison cell in Aroha, from the history which has shaped and led them to that point. So you cannot isolate a young person who takes their own life from that history. And the fact that most of our young people do not take their own lives is not a forgetting of that history. Rather, it is a tribute to the resilience that some can live in spite of that history. But for those who find that struggle too hard, if we define meaningful and caring solutions, then it seems to me we must be honest about the history. And that leads me to the three conclusions I'd like to leave you with. In the end, the taking or the imposition of colonisation is not just about the denigration of language, the denial of one's traditions. It is, like racism, instead a visceral and deeply ingrained hurt. A hurt which traverses generations. And to deal with the hurt today is to acknowledge the trauma of that intergenerational pain. And I know that many of you who work in this field are trying to understand what can be done about that. And I do urge you to continue to pursue the answers. The second conclusion is that not only is colonisation, like racism, which is a bastard child of colonisation, not only is colonisation a visceral hurt, it is a taking of power. It is a venture by people, mainly from the states of Europe, into the lands of indigenous peoples, and dismissing the political, constitutional and legal institutions which were already in place, had served those indigenous peoples well for hundreds of years, and replaced them with a foreign system brought by the colonisers. But the imposition of that foreign system, the dismissal of the existing systems of power and law, were redefined, and so that Paikea law, for example, became the law, as if though no other law existed. And Paikea lawyers began to say, even to talk about Māori law is to threaten the idea that there should be one law for all. But there was one law for all prior to 1840. And to talk about the Westminster system of constitutional and political authority as something that is universal or normal is to hide the fact that its very abnormality is the fact that it was imposed in lands which were already self-governing. And until we address the reality of that taking of power, have honest discussions about constitutional transformation based on the Treaty of Waitangi, then we will continue to allow the stresses and heartache which lead to the powerlessness that leads to the taking of one's life. And the third conclusion is one which I want to leave with you because I am sure that in your work you see enough pain, you see enough heartache, and often the situation must seem hopeless. But if I've learned one thing in my life, and one of the advantages of getting older, because I'm 26 now, one of the advantages of getting older is that you learn certain things. And one of the profound lessons I learned really early in my life, and which I've never moved away from, is that in the end, the best answers for the issues that confront Māori, that confront Pacific Island people and others who have been colonised, come not from the systems and ideologies or even the science of the colonisers, but come from the traditions and the wisdom of the Indigenous peoples themselves. And this country for the last 20 years has rather nervously and haltingly moved towards an acceptance of that, although the acknowledgement of the Māori perspective remains in many ways what John Raiha called it in the 1980s, a carving above the Paikea reality house that doesn't change the way the house operates or functions. So the conclusion I'd leave to you is to have trust and faith that Māori people and others will find the solutions for themselves. And the challenge for those who are not Māori is not to try and squeeze that into some accepted or seemingly preordained notion of what works best, but rather to be humble in the acceptance of that different knowledge and that different wisdom. And as in so many things, the best way I know to illustrate that is with the story about my mokopuna. Those of you who've heard me speak before know I love talking about my mokopuna. They keep me sane, they keep me broke.